with the sanitary and phytosanitary measures that specific markets require. And if you look at our structure of production, which is largely smallholder based, for these smallholders to be able to participate in commercial supply chains, it means that they must be able to comply with SPS requirements. What then that simply means is that the region, as well as specific countries, must come up with a framework, a regulatory framework that is able to create that conducive environment for trade and investments to occur. And it's on that basis that I'll be looking at Thank you. I'll look briefly at what we mean by SPS measures, look at some of the effects of trade, and look at some of the constraints related to SPS, as well as looking at some of the capacity improvements we're trying to carry out in the region for trade to occur, and some issues that are relevant to the grain sector, as well as issues that we can consider in future. When we talk about SPS measures, what do we really mean? These are any measures that are taken to protect human life, plant life, and animal life. And they include all those things that I've listed down there, including relevant laws, decrees, regulations, processing, testing, quarantines, etc., etc. And the reason why we do this is that along the supply chains, value chains, there are a number of areas that we can introduce risks to the commodities that we produce. It can be at production level, it can be at processing level, it can be at the point of sale, or even just during transportation. Now, why are these really important? We talk about increasing productivity. What that simply means that we have to look at a way of improving the control of animal diseases, improving plant health, and also regulating the way we use chemical products in our production processes. As I said earlier, the demand for safe food is increasing because of increased awareness around food safety, and therefore these SPS measures are really important just for the general health of the country's population. I've talked about inclusion in the regional and global trade markets, but more importantly, that once these improved conditions for production and exports occur, it is likely to lead to more opportunities, increased income, and of course, the welfare of the population. But how are these measures really important in terms of trade? We all know in terms of high compliance costs, sometimes the processes, the procedures to be able to meet the requirements can be extremely stringent. But sometimes when they are not transparent, when there are new rules in the market, then it means for the producers, we must be able to face the adjustment costs, which in most cases, especially the small and medium enterprises, may not be able, and even our smallholder producers may not be able to meet without external support to be able to meet those sometimes these measures are applied in the guise of protecting either industries or products from a particular country. But in most cases, they can also be misapplied. And in the process, we generally affect the way our trade moves along the value chains. Now, in terms of the ESC region, some of the major constraints related to the SPS include, for example, we have regulations and laws that are not consistent with the modern trends because of the different responsibilities in terms of regulating these SPS measures that are spread all over. The issues of coordination becomes a big issue. We talk about infrastructure, major issue, particularly we know the use of laboratories in terms of decision making. Some of our laboratories are not well equipped, sometimes they don't even exist. But I think even sometimes the human resource to be able to undertake those tests can be a major issue. And this all translate into problems when it comes to trade facilitation. But the sector itself receives very low attention unless there's a crisis. It's because perhaps countries in the region have not realized the importance of the SPS issues, and they are only addressed whenever there is a crisis. And finally, of course, the role of the private sector. We ask ourselves, we as a private sector, are we really playing a critical role in terms of ensuring that the issues, particularly what the regulators are doing, and also how to make your own work easier in terms of meeting those SPS requirements, are we playing a role extremely well? Now, what the ESC has tried to do is to create some framework that is going to streamline some of these things. In 2013, the ESC Secretariat, the Council of Ministers approved the SPS protocol, which is meant, one, to support or to promote safe trade in agricultural commodities. Two is to support the cooperation and coordination of the SPS issues at national and regional level. Three is to try and support the implementation of the principles enshrined in the WTO SPS agreement, namely harmonization, transparency, equivalence, regionalization, etc., etc. And more importantly is to promote the sale of safe food commodities in the region. Now, this protocol is undergoing ratification. Glad to note that most of the countries in the ESC region have ratified this protocol, except the United Republic of Tanzania, which is yet to do that. But it's important that all countries are able to ratify that for the objectives of that framework to be realized. Part of what is also happening is the process of harmonization of the SPS measures in the region, issues around phytosanitary measures, sanitary measures touching on feed and fish and fishery products, food and feed safety measures are being harmonized under the umbrella of the ESC Secretariat. There's a framework that is being developed. The SPS bill has been drafted, and it is intended to support the implementation of the SPS protocol in the region. At the moment, it's undergoing through ESC policy approval processes, and these instruments should be able to support streamlining of the SPS regulatory framework in the region to be able to attract investment and support trade. Part of what we are doing in the region in conjunction with the ESC is to support soft skills development. I'll not elaborate on that because of the time issues. But more relevant to this sector is, I think, the issues we have been hearing since morning about mycotoxins and aflatoxin, a very, very big issue. But I think there are quite a number of initiatives that are ongoing in terms of mitigating those effects. In terms of trade facilitation, of course, the issues will be around testing of the consignments and conformity assessment measures. In terms of diseases, we have heard this morning about the presence of recently of the armyworm. We have a larger problem with the larger grain borer as well as the maize lethal necronic disease. With a clear framework in terms of how to respond to some of these challenges becomes extremely critical in the region. So in terms of what needs to be considered, I think, is to strengthen the harmonization and implementation of the SPS measures in the region, development of equivalence agreements as one of the instruments to support trade facilitation. There's also the mutual recognition agreements between parties, which is also a trade facilitation measure. And how can we, in a transparent way, apply the application of the SPS measures in the region? And the role of the private sector, I think, needs to be extremely important. The private sector needs to take an active role. I'm sure something is being done, but I think we wait until there's a crisis before we rise up. The reason why this is very, very important, as we said earlier, is that we need to create a predictable environment for the private sector, and also to allow for planning as well as issues of concern as regards SPS are identified from the onset. That's why having a clear, predictable framework is really key in terms of supporting trade. To finish off, I want to leave you with these 3 questions for thought. The first one is, has the grain sector evaluated some of your concerns related to SPS so that they can be addressed? I think this is something we need to think about. Second one is, what does the grain sector see as its role in SPS regulatory framework? I think this is also extremely critical. And the last question I want to leave with you is, what are some of the short-term goals with regards to the application of SPS measures for your organization? Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Protest. This has been quite an informative kind of presentation. And now I'm opening the floor for discussion. So, okay, so I've seen in all the presentation from the our guest here, our panelists, a lot has been spoken in the area of enabling environment. So whether it's issue of data and information, etc., etc. But I would like the panelists actually to use 2 minutes each, you know, to respond to some of the issues that I'll bring to your attention. And then after that, I'll take some few questions, maybe 3 or 4 from the audience that will be directed to the panel. First of all, I will go with Professor Nyange. You have spoken a lot about data and information flow as being some of the key issues that we need to look at when we want to see the grain sector moving forward. And that has been echoed in almost every particular presentation the panelists have made, whether in terms of investment, where do we need to invest, whether it's a coordination, what do we need to do, whether it's about food security, what do we need to do. It all comes to the information that we have and the data that we have actually to help us to make those kind of decisions, whether in policy or et cetera, et cetera. So Professor Nyange, in 2 minutes, And I want each of the panelists to take this question on. So 2 minutes, I start with Professor Nyange. What is your take in that? What do you think the countries that we are in Africa we need to do? Please, in 2 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I would say one of the challenges, of course, is statistics. As we know, censuses are very, very expensive. According to the World Bank, it costs about $100 per household in Africa to carry out a census, and that's only operational cost, and it does not even include salaries. But I would say currently opportunities are available, especially through use of technology. For example, remote sensing, where, for example, here in Tanzania, we are piloting annual ag census, which is use of remote sensing data to estimate crop area. The challenge with that is the fact that in Africa we have mixed cropping, unlike in the US, where if you're able to capture an area, a crop area, you can translate it into production, because the practices are very uniform. The yields are uniform, the agronomic practices are uniform. But here you have mixed cropping, mixed practices. So that data has to be augmented also with field survey. But the advantage is that you can have a much smaller sample. So opportunities to reduce the cost of surveys are available, and we need to really make use of that. Another area, of course, is harmonization of surveys. For example, in Tanzania here, we have a series of national surveys. We have household budget survey, which basically is expenditure, income expenditure survey. We have ag census, we have panel surveys, we have demographic and health surveys. Each one has some strength and gaps. And as I mentioned, it's expensive to carry out to these national census and surveys. So we needed to maybe to reduce their numbers, try to consolidate some of them so that we can have fewer surveys which we can conduct regularly. A very good example in some of the statistics which I could not project here is these medium-sized farms. You can capture them partially in the census data, but you cannot get the full picture because some of the farming households are living in, are based in urban area, while the ag census is usually rural based. So what we did, we tried to use demographic and health survey. I have my colleague here, Milu Puyango, is also from Michigan State University, has been working on that and was able to capture that information from demographic and health survey. So we needed to be really creative, try unconventional approaches, into getting information. With technology, I believe that we can reduce the cost of survey. Our project has also tried to use mobile phones in conducting farm surveys. And I think over time, with the capacity building, might be successful. There are some challenges with that, particularly the connectivity in a rural area, but there are also issues on the biasness of the sample, especially taking into consideration that some of the very poor households don't yet own their cell phones or the mobile phones. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'll very much go forward to protest to take on the question, the role of data and information in moving the grain sector forward, because this information is required by everybody, by the government, to make the right decisions, to inform the policymakers, to inform also the business people in the sector, because I've been seeing that echoing everywhere, and I think it's a very critical part of it, because even the structured grain business or structured grain trade, it can only happen if we have the data. We understand where is the production, what quality is it, and everything. So what can we do as a continent or as a bloc into addressing these things? Please.
As you rightly say, of course, the issue around the information and data is very critical in terms of decision making. And where I stand, I think the exchange of information, for example, even in terms of just the data in relation to the consignments, the capture of consignments at, for example, border controls. I think it's important that that information can be shared so that the customs authorities can focus much more in terms of commodities that are high risk, and the low risk ones can be left out. The issues around technology has become, of course, an important factor in terms of trade, but in terms of information sharing, I think even our professionals in the region need to have their own frameworks, their networks that could use the technology in terms of exchanging of information rather than waiting for the physical meetings to take place. I think that can be a long way in reducing some of the costs that we experience in terms of moving people around.
Okay, thank you so much. So I'll take one question from the audience. If anybody has a question to the panelists, please, because I think the dossier was very heavy. They almost exhausted everything. But if we have any particular question, no question? Yes, please, to the gentleman. Can we bring mic there? There is one question, please. Quickly, just send the mic.
My name is Dr. Alfred Oshunsanya. I'm from Malawi. I'm an agro-processor and I'm also an agro-consultant. I've observed something since morning, you know, and it's a little bit difficult issue to be mentioned, but I think we are all professionals, no politicians here. So I think we are dancing around the issue in Africa, and this might have to do with our governance and politics. Some of the decisions that needs to be taken on aspects of implementing these issues and policies, cross-border trade and things like that, has to do with the protectionism of the politician themselves. You know, if I am a president and I know that if I take a decision on the policy issue and the voters are not going to vote for me in the next 2 years or 3 years, then I wouldn't take that decision. But if I know that I only have one term to serve, like 6 years or 7 years, and I'm gone, then I'll take a decision that will help the country move forward. So these are the issues. But who is going to bell the card? Who is going to tell help us to change the system or to normalize situation whereby our leaders and decision makers can be able to take good decisions that will help them forward rather than thinking about losing the next election. I think you get what I mean. Thank you.
Thank you so much. In respect of the time that we have, I would like everybody to get a chance, but I think it won't be possible. Therefore, I would like to invite Dr. Tenai to come forward. Dr. Tenai is around? Please. While Dr. Tenai is preparing, I would very much like to thank the panelists. This has been quite an informative kind of discussion. And I've left out Dr. Gideon and Adama for a reason, because their presentation were very exhaustive, you know, data-driven. And I think most of us, we were taking notes on most of these things. So please, can you say a few, can you move a vote of thanks, and then you can present to the panelists here, please. You have 0 minutes.
Yeah, good afternoon. I'm very happy today. We have had a very good talk from these experts, and we actually know where we are going as the grain sector in Eastern and Central Africa. So I want to thank you very much for your presentations and what you have actually given us. I know we are going to get the presentations in